Thank you. Thank you so much for having me here today. I think it's a great pleasure. I've seen many of you by video or Zoom. It's nice to see many of you in person. So my name is Rishi Kamaleswaran. I'm an associate professor at Emory University in the biomedical informatics department and computer scientist by training, but I've done a lot of work in pediatrics and neonatal medicine. So it's a great honor to give this talk on what I think would be the things that change pediatric intensive care over the next 5 to 10 years, and I think where the directions are moving. So as many of you know, AI and machine learning have just had profound impact in almost all aspects of what we do, whether it be driving our cars or checking our emails. In all aspects, machine learning and AI has made a difference. Medical AI has grown from a small group, as Randall and others had described, to now really becoming one of the forefront conversations. Applications of medical AI has spanned a variety of topics, from clinical decision support to robotics to drug discovery and personalized medicine. Foundational advances are being made in AI almost at rap speed. We just cannot keep up with what is going on. What used to be considered state-of-the-art just yesterday, today we find out it's broken our thought process. It requires us, forces us to think about what can be done in the future. So what exactly is AI? What exactly is machine learning? How does this play a role in what we do? As mentioned, neural networks were developed very early on in the 50s and 60s and so on to try to characterize what goes on in our own brains, our own neurons, and how they fire and how all those firings come together to make sense of the natural world, and how that encoded understanding can be used to make decisions and to respond and react in real time to whatever it presents in front of us. And these novel theoretical foundational questions really sparked a small group of investigators to push forward. But there were just numerous technical drawbacks in how we could replicate what goes on in our head in silico. And these technical drawbacks were really a function of our understanding of mathematics at that time and how we've evolved and learned to characterize these nonlinear interactions and keep that process robust enough that it could be replicated at scale. But about in the late 1990s, with the introduction of the perceptron and the introduction of some of these novel algorithms like backpropagation, which allows us to recall and remember some of the earlier learning components that were done over thousands of iterations, it really it provided the new tools that we could use to advance machine learning and neural networks. In parallel, while theoretical advancements were being made, many of the roadblocks and the stumbling blocks was just that we just did not have sufficient hardware. We just did not have the machines to compute 1 million parameters and do dot products on all of those 1 million parameters and vectors and at scale within the required time to train one epoch of a neural network training. And you imagine having to repeat that process 1,000 times. It will take you years and years and years to try to compute something that today we can do in under an hour. So the computational processes and the infrastructure was just not available. But things changed, and things changed fast. With the introduction of advances in CPUs, and also with the popularity of graphical processing units, especially with gaming and other things that were going on at that time, it allowed for computational engineers and computer scientists to perform these mathematical operations fast and in ways that we consider parallelized. So it allowed us to massively parallelize these computational tasks, distribute them over thousands of GPU cores, and now millions, And you can see the scale over here. We're getting, as mentioned earlier, we're getting into the 300, above gigabytes of data being processed every second. So we're expanding just how much data and processing we can do on just a single chipset. And now imagine this being multiplied by 1,000 machines, by 1,000,000 machines, and so on. So it's just profound what we can do in computational hardware. So when you marry the theoretical advances and the availability of the basic hardware, we're at a very different place right now than we were in the early 90s or the early 2000s. So started the hype. There was a lot of interest. There was a lot of attention. There was a lot of questions. I want to take you back to the earliest notion of what artificial intelligence meant, and this goes back to the Turing test. And if you recall, basically the test, the purpose or the goal of the test is to present a prompt to a human questioner who would ask questions to a machine and to a human being. And depending on how well the questioner could discern whether the answer came from a machine or from a human being, the AI algorithm was scored. And as you can imagine, questions that were a simple yes or no just did really well. But if you had to describe something or do anything like that, it was just a total failure. And things just kept going in that process. And so we had significant advances in other types of learning algorithms like ontological learning algorithms, schematic learning algorithms, and so on. And these things just kept growing, but we knew we were hitting something. And then came, very many years later, IBM Deep Blue and IBM Watson. It was heralded as the next generational AI. It was heralded as the AI system that was going to change the world. But fundamentally, it was developed on a large ontological-based framework where every concept had to be associated to every other known concept. There were no such things as neural networks. Everything had to be characterized, and if there was a level of uncertainty and the system could not infer that level of uncertainty, it just would not give a correct answer. And so IBM presented itself. It came. It did really well in scenarios where questions were very specific, and there was a very specific answer, like Jeopardy, and it could answer that in a fly without any sort of difficulty. But when Watson was presented in the MD Anderson Center, it just didn't do so well, and so it had to be shut down, and lots of money was lost. Then we had the introduction of these chat-based interactive agents like Siri and Alexa and all of these things, which were utilizing interactive prompt-based systems to query a very large database and data set of encodings, then would provide a prompt back which was pseudo-conversational. And then, we made further advances in generative adversarial networks, as was described, and we developed methods and tools that were simulating and synthesizing and generating almost very freakishly like real tools. We had the classic deep fake video of Obama, which came out in 2017, 5 years ago. And things just came on. We saw an explosion in data science literature in the medical space over the last several years. In the most recent publication puts it at almost 16,000 papers being reviewed or published rather in 2020, and this was 3 years ago. So imagine even more now. You're looking at a significant amount of volume of things that are coming in. But what's the reality? The reality is that many of the systems and many of the methods that we're using are really tools that have been built in the 1990s. These are supervised learning algorithms. These are largely tools where we give the learning algorithm an objective, and it has to maximize that objective based on the interpretations and the criteria that we've set as the right answer. There's a lot of things that are that introduces as a challenge, but one of that is that by allowing the computer to formulate its own decisions and its own encoding about what is underlying or what the relationships are between the data that we provide, it can quickly get complicated. And it can start to create interactions in ways that we just don't understand. And so we introduce the concept of the black box. We cannot understand why it is making these decisions, but it's making those decisions. And to this day, even though this concept was introduced several years ago, to this day we are still stuck with trying to infer interactions amongst neural networks, especially when you have 1,000 neurons that are interacting. Each one of those neurons are interacting with 1,000 other neurons in another layer, each one of those interacting with 1,000 or more, and so on and so on. So you're exponentially increasing the possible weight and the relationship of that weight to other weights downstream. How do you explain that? How do you explain how 1 point change in one layer is now causing cascades of changes in other layers? And how do you explain that? It's hard to try to explain this highly nonlinear, high-dimensional interaction. We still have not significantly made progress in it. So then there's another area of work that started that tried to look at the posterior predictive performances, looked at the probabilities that were being generated, and then using the probabilities that were being generated and using the input data, it tried to guess, so if heart rate was increased by 1 beat per minute, that changes the accuracy, given all other variables being the same. But that is another system in itself. We're adjuncting another basic learning algorithm, so to speak, on top of another learning algorithm. Each one is doing something different, but it's trying to understand what the other one's doing. So we've really complicated the field, but we're still, in many ways, trying to understand. There's also a group that says, why do we even need to understand? Why not just let the machine just do what it's supposed to do? We don't know why we do how we raise our hands, how many neurons are firing, and how many nerves are going off. We don't know that, so why should we ask the algorithm to do the same? And these type of challenges lead to the other big grand challenge that we have in the field, and that is the challenge of generalizability. Oftentimes, when each of us in our own institutions are developing machine learning algorithms, we're using our own data. We are classifying our patients into these classes using the rules that we've developed or using standardized criteria that we interpret in a very specific way. And so all of these introduce biases and interpretations that then go into a model, and then we take the model and we expect that it would work in another system where maybe they would have a very different view of what is condition A or what is condition B. And so we're stuck in many ways with the gap of generalizability. And this is the challenge that we have today. And this is where I think opportunities exist for consortia, for large systems to come together and pool data and use data as an asset across the cohort. And with the recent advances in diffusion models, as we had shown, we are now rapidly advancing the ways in which we're generating content. Our generative models have become so great. And so with a prompt, give me a cartoon picture of a cow with rainbow colors jumping over a cheese moon, well, it did pretty well. It did pretty well. So we are at a point where we can generate very robust images, video, text, a lot of these with just simple prompts using language models. Now, the question comes, what does that actually do in terms of our basic understanding of how these things work? Just recently, we had a very interesting paper that was published that when we utilize these stable diffusion models, and we provide it with certain prompts, and these models are trained on billions of images. But when you train them and then you ask it for draw me something and you give it a real person, it can actually memorize that original content and redraw that same person. So there's been a lot of questions about privacy, about how these language models are learning. There's also a community of computer scientists. The argument is all this is nonsense. We're wasting our time. We're training these large language models to remember these oddities and to generate all this stuff, but none of these are generalizable. All of these will do what they were told to do, which is to generate prompts in English as a language, to generate images with certain characteristics. They're not general artificial intelligence. We have not solved that problem. And so that continues to be a conversation, and there's a lot of divisions and so on. But to this day, even though we've come up with these very robust models, I would also argue we are still years ahead, behind in terms of where we would consider ourselves in meeting that goal of generalizable AI. In terms of the pressing needs that are driving some of the advances in AI, especially in medicine, we've been challenged by realities that occur all around, and especially on the adult side, we have aging populations that need care. We have a very expensive healthcare system, and the questions that we have around what do we do to manage our infrastructure as our populations age and we no longer have the resources to provide equitable and affordable care to all of these patients. And that's, I think, where some of the big interests and big investments are going to come over the next years. They've already started with many ways with large private consortia or industry investing in healthcare startups that are focusing on developing personalized tools for elderly, whether it be for different types of mental disease or other things. The emerging concepts in healthcare venture capital space is now, how do we take the healthcare and bring it home? How do we bring the hospitals home? How do we provide a healthcare provider for every single patient that would be willing to partake in that? And as such, there's been a number of advances that have come out in computational space to try to solve that. We have advances in ambient computing. We are able to now embed computing in our clothes. We can sample sweat. We can sample vital signs in our fabric. We have the ability to do human activity recognition. We can move around with devices in our arms. We can use cameras to monitor gait. We can look at a whole modality of sensors and so on. We're also moving towards autonomous systems that can perceive and respond and react in real time and not based on prompts or things that we've developed. So there's been a lot of space and a lot of activity that's gone in. The real driver for all of these envisions has been this concept of edge compute. Can we take AI and machine learning and all these robust tools, and can we apply that at every single node that would exist? For example, in your refrigerator, in your toaster, in your shoes, in your clothes, in your whatever it may be, in your eyeglasses. Can we put a computer in every single thing? And can we then bring it all together and apply these very robust computational algorithms to take in all that data and to really process it in ways that we just could not before, and generate novel insights that can help not only in healthcare but broadly across all the industries. The challenge with trying to achieve edge AI is this notion that it's a one-way street, that you take data from the edge and then you bring it to the central cloud to do some expensive processing, and then you send that data back. There's been a huge interest in trying to overcome this unilateral computational system. And this is, I think, where the real opportunity is over the next several years. We're moving away from supervised algorithms to weakly labeled algorithms which are interactive. Similar to what ChatGPT and other things are doing, these are going to be contextually aware. So if it generates a prediction, you will be able to interact with it. You'll be able to provide a prompt back to it to say, no, I don't think that's right, or explain it to me. And then it'll be able to provide some response back to you in ways that are adaptive in real world. And these are examples of what we see in the whole space, which now has emerged, called human-machine teaming, and how do we get this contextually aware computational system into real practice. Generative AI, in many ways, has changed the game. It is going to continue to change the game, and I'm going to push that it's maybe going to change the ways in which we also see how medicine is practiced. I think in many ways we think that there's going to be an AI agent that's going to adjunct some human, but in some cases there actually may be AI agents that are fully autonomous and may operate independent of human supervision, and we have to prepare ourselves for those type of environments. When does that happen? What's the liability and all the others that goes into it? But one of the real, I think, interesting advances of where generative AI is playing a role is in the discovery of novel drugs that have never even been observed in human life, or no humans have ever observed these chemical compounds. AI generative models are able to generate these novel candidates, and those candidates can then be tested and rigorously evaluated in vivo. And then now we just yesterday, a biotech startup has announced that they've taken a model that a machine learning algorithm had generated and is going for human trials. So we're at that point, and I expect that over the next 5-10 years, this is going to just ramp up in ways that we just don't expect today. And as I mentioned, ambient computing earlier, it does not limit our imaginations to just geriatrics or palliative care or other ways. It really will play a role in almost everything that we do. Already we see that computational systems are, our connected home cameras. They can identify whether it's the mailman coming to deliver a package or if it's your family. We're going to expect that that's going to get more and more common across more and more modalities. We're expecting that these devices will be integrated into every facet of what we consider to be tangible, and will also provide interactive ways. What is happening today is the Alexa or our Nest doorbell cameras are identifying these packages and the frequency in which we order certain packages. And when we open them up at the front door, it's able to identify what's inside those packages. And the next time you do a Google search, you're going to start seeing those type of things on. But that's just the simple use case. There's going to be, I think, more opportunities for us to see how that can interact from a holistic standpoint. Human activity recognition, we're starting to see huge advances already. Some colleagues at the University of Florida have already implemented video cameras in their ICUs to recognize delirium and other sorts of things. This is already happening, and this is just going to get more and more common. In autonomous systems, we're starting to see a number of use cases where autonomous systems will possibly independently initiate certain tools. We think that there's a human that's absolutely required for certain tasks, but I think we'll be surprised when we find that many of these tasks may actually be able to be performed more efficiently by these things that we can expect to do. Possibly, maybe in the next 5 to 10 years, we may see autonomous robots intubating and extubating patients all by themselves. We never know. I think the large language space is going to again get more interesting, but I would consider it a pause before the next storm. And really the pause here is that there's a lot of attention being focused on these pre-trained algorithms, which have, again, large encodings, but limitations, as was mentioned earlier. We're going to get to a point where those serve as foundational models instead of being the ultimate model in themselves. They will serve as puzzle pieces that we will put together into very large, robust infrastructures and utilize their what they have remembered or memorized, not as an end goal, but as a utility function. So we're getting to a point where we do have to think about generalizable AI. I think we are in heading in that direction, and this is not generalizable AI. This is very much still a discriminative AI, but we're definitely heading in that direction. So what does the final goal for AI-assisted healthcare look like? What can it look like? Well, I have a small illustration which I think it could be something that's achievable in the next 5-10 years. I think, imagine yourself waking up one morning where your Apple Watch is pinging you and saying that over the last day I've noticed that the temperature and heart monitor sensors in your T-shirt have been showing an elevated vital sign. I've sampled the sweat in your clothes, and there's excess sodium or whatever it may be, but the air sensors, the VOC sensors in the smoke alarm monitor is telling me that you're breathing out a lot of these metabolites that are expunged by this type of bacteria. When you went to the toilet yesterday and in the middle of the night, we've already sampled some of the excretions and done a very robust metabolomics on those. We are now looking at your movement over your Nest doorbell camera and seeing all of the things that you're struggling with. Hey, I think you have this thing. I've already ordered this drug for you. Amazon, little drone is gonna drop it down. Take it and just relax. I think that's where we're going to go, and I look forward to the day we can finally say that that's real. This is another art that's been generated by our good friend, the AI algorithm, and so maybe this is where the future of AI is. But as I learned, when someone says they're certain about something, you never know where the next curveball is going to come from. So yeah, thank you so much for your time.